Hey, this is Dave from metalepidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review.
Good God, king of the dogs, walks with big ideas. Slow bends, we got friends, won't be left alone. Runs out from his big heart, the stench of blood and air. So bold, out in the cold.
What's up, guys? Dave here from Metal Epidemic, back with another album review and joined by my Duncan. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from the Purveyors of Sonic Rock, Our Man in the Bronze Age. The band's new album, Hexed Endeavours, was released on October 8th via Fr33zehead Records. These guys formed in 2007 in Milton Keynes, and Hexed Endeavours will be the band's third full-length album. The album was recorded at Farheath Studios in Northamptonshire, engineered by Angus Wallace and Tom Platt, mixed and mastered by Tom Platt, and produced by Our Man in the Bronze Age. So, we did a little reaction to one of the tracks from this album called Midnight Lovers. Nice. And we were all pretty much sold on these guys from that one track.
Yeah.
But did the rest of the album live up to these high expectations? Well, they said in the press release that this album would be stacked with a multitude of genres. And they weren't lying, Duncan. They were not lying.
Nope.
Some bands say, yeah, we've really experimented with multiple styles on our new album, and then you hear it, and they've literally added a bit of clean guitar.
Yeah.
These guys said we're mixing rock, prog, doom, stoner, post-rock, sludge, alternative. You know what I mean? And they actually have. They have lived up to those words. Now that can be a good thing. You know, keeping an album varied is one kind of sure way of keeping people engaged and like intrigued as to what's coming next. But we've also heard that, you know, turn the other way and sound like an incohesive mess of an album.
A bag of riffs, I believe.
Of riffs, yes.
Is a great description. When you hear something, you're like, did you listen to the flow, or did you just go, here's a riff, and here's another riff, and here's a third riff. There's a song. So yeah.
Yeah. And this album really does take you through this like myriad of textures and tones and different styles. And if I'm completely honest, on my first listen to this, it didn't really go that well. If I'm being totally honest with you right now.
Interesting.
I think what the problem was is I kind of went into this thinking it was going to be an album that was kind of tonally in line with Midnight Lovers,
which is the odd man out of this album.
100%, yeah.
It's also the perfect single for this album. Like listening to the rest of this, I can hear like 2 or 3 songs that would make really cool singles, but in terms of just downright catchy,
yeah.
Like, earworm of a song where you can get a bit of quirk, a bit of interest, and get people in. Midnight Lovers ticks all the boxes.
Yeah.
It's not indicative of the overall. All the elements are there, all the component parts are there for sure.
Yeah.
But even the pace of the song is a bit more kind of, you know, bouncy and energetic than the rest of the album. Which,
and I hadn't listened to any of the other singles, because when I heard Midnight Lovers, I thought, that sounds great. I can't wait to hear that in the album. I'm not going to listen to anything else. And then when I hear the album, I'll hear the rest of it. And that was it. So I didn't listen to anything else. And that track, you know, is the band that they're most kind of playful. But they don't really come back to that side of their personality on the album. There's maybe a little bit of it on Coma Haircut, maybe slightly. But it's certainly not as quirky as like Midnight Lovers. The rest of this album feels kind of way more serious, and with, as I said, with a huge mix of styles. And it kind of starts off on the kind of rockier side of things with the Fall of Athens, which is a kind of almost kind of sludgy kind of stoner number with a lot of great harmonies. very
builds out that intro because this is something that confused me. Is the intro into the Fall of Athens is basically I know why they've done it, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also don't know why they did it.
Yeah.
To me, the Fall of Athens is essentially a heavier version of the Rise of the Bronze, which is the intro.
Sure.
But to me, there's no need for those tracks to be separate tracks.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Actually, when I first heard it, I thought it was all one track.
Yeah, because that's how it's played. Now, I think on a non-album review version of this, if you're listening to Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to your albums, whichever mechanism you choose to do it, there isn't a gap in between those songs. Those songs will flow in. But listening to it as a screener, where you bring them into your audio device of whatever thing there's a space in between the songs. Because the machines, Dave, the technology doesn't know to clip those in between tracks. So, I had a break of less than a second where everything stops, and then the next track kicked in, which was just an extension of what I'd just heard. And then when the chorus kicked in, it was like, well, it's what they're doing in the intro, right? It's slightly heavier. It kind of put me off. I think that's maybe not an issue listening to as a purchased album, which I recommend people do. You know what I mean? As a purchased album, I don't think that's there. I still don't know what the logic is there, though, because it isn't that much of a shift.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
From the opening thing, so once again, I mean, it's their album, so I'll shut the fuck up.
Yeah, but I totally get where you're coming from in that. When it does kick into that track, though, the Fall of Athens, it felt very in tone with something you might hear from like a Baroness album, in my opinion. That's what the kind of vibes I was picking up. And then it goes into Midnight Lovers. Different tone again.
It's hard not to dance when you hear it, honestly.
It's
awesome, man.
So memorable, such a memorable track. And when it kicked in, when I was listening to it as in the full album, I was like, oh yes, here we go. And I just got into it all over again. After that, they start to bring in more styles. You start to get in, we started pulling a little bit of prog on Cramp Hands. The guitar licks and the keys are very proggy in tone. But they still got that kind of fuzz rock kind of undertone to it. And although you don't get to hear much of it on the first few tracks, the band do have a very kind of majestic kind of ambient side at times on this album, where they really do lean into those kind of big, kind of sprawling, clean sections, maybe in kind of more kind of post-rock characteristics, whether it's, the kind of lead work on Black Widow or the piano section on Ramblins or a kind of more post-rock approach on Two Square Meals. And those tracks are very kind of slow burners, so that the pace of the album does vary quite a bit. And while they unleash their kind of darker, more kind of riff-laden side on tracks like Brutus, they will easily just slip into something more kind of reserved, like Bill Odyssey, where they show off a completely different side of the band. Bill Odyssey is way more kind of minimalist with that, again, a kind of slow burn kind of build up piano and vocals and bass, but it really hits the mark in terms of trying to kind of build to that kind of climax with it kind of builds that kind of big climax with almost a kind of doom rock type guitar chords. It was one of my favorite kind of moments of the album. I kind of loved the contrast of that track. And it's got a very kind of soulful, kind of heartfelt kind of vocal delivery on it. While on the vocals though, stunning. We mentioned on Midnight Lovers,
dude, honestly,
the harmonies are so on point on this release, just fantastic. They have a real kind of understanding of when to layer up the vocals and thicken it with that kind of really nice harmony. But then there's moments where they just kind of pull it back and it's more kind of raw and honest, and you can hear that on the album closer. It's called She.
It's vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You feel yourself being drawn into it when you're listening to it, which is it just shows a different side of the band and the music, but the music merits it as well. Yeah. It's really smart. It's it's a really smartly written album.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even
definitely.
the minimalist stuff. I think at times it's easy like to hear the word minimalist and think, well, they're not doing much on it.
Yeah.
That, I mean, there's nowhere to hide on something that's minimalist. You know what I mean? If you've got just a piano and vocals, there's nowhere to fucking hide.
Yeah.
That better be interesting, or it's going to become repetitive very quickly.
Yeah.
But the band almost challenge you in those moments to listen, we're going to strip out all the stuff that you've heard before, and then we're going to leave you with this segment for a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And it works so well. It's very bold and, like I say, daring to do that, because it could so easily become something that you would switch off to or want to fast forward past, and that doesn't happen.
Yeah, totally. And when we watched the Midnight Lovers video, we kind of obviously spoke about the fact that they have 2 drummers. And I did kind of wonder how that was going to play out on the album, because on that track you can clearly hear it. And when I was listening to the album on my headphones, you can hear there's obviously 2 drummers playing at the same time. You know, the snares are ever so slightly separated, so you can hear the fact that there is actually 2 people playing. And they do use that technique again on the album, in the kind of heavier parts that require a bit more of a kind of drive, a bit more groove. Tracks like Brutus, for example. But there are also times where it is just one kit, so I like the fact they kind of mixed it up on each track, because I don't think, tracks like Ramblings, for example, I don't think that would have necessarily worked with 2 kits. I think it'd been far too much. So I think one of the drummers also plays keys, so he might switch between the 2, I'm not sure. But as I said, I didn't totally click with this on first listen, because I think I was expecting a completely different album. But this is an album that benefits from repeat listens, in my opinion. Once you get to grips with what type of band this is and all the various kind of sides of their sound, you start to really appreciate what these guys have got to offer. Well, I certainly did anyway. I struggled to find anything really negative about it after I kind of got my groove with the album. If I had anything to say that was like only kind of even slightly negative, I'd say some of the kind of slow burn kind of moments maybe burned on slightly too long, before it kind of hit its peak. And then there was maybe a couple of moments where the hooks maybe didn't grab me quite as much as the others. But that aside, really interesting album, and a really well constructed album, very well delivered. It had way more depth to it than I was anticipating. After hearing Midnight Lovers, I was expecting one thing, and then when I heard the album, I was like, well, wait a minute, this is not what I was expecting, but there's way more to this than I was expecting. It didn't really go the way I was expecting it to go, but I ended up really enjoying it in the end. What about yourself? What do you think?
So I maybe slightly different first listen, but certainly I would totally agree. The more you listen to it, the more you get out of it. And it's an album, reminds me, like, in a lot of respects, not musically, but the listening journey reminds me a lot of Boss Keloid this year. Where, like, the more I listen to that album, the more I get out of it and the more I enjoy it. But that first listen, I was there, I was engaged. But by listen number 5, I'm like, oh, all right, there's whole sections here that are doing all this cool stuff. It kind of reminded me a lot of that. And weirdly, they're a band that I would say exist in a similar bubble, whilst not sounding like, in that they appear to have no limit to what they're prepared to put in a song or experiment with, but are clearly conscious of what might tip a song over and when to pull back from certain aspects, which once again is just good, clever songwriting. Sometimes it's not what you play on a song that actually makes a song. Like we'll remove a guitar from this section here and just rely on the rest of the instruments. Especially when you're in this genre, bands tend to be very guitar driven, and that's not the case here. Like you mentioned before, when you listen to a track like Rambling, which is for predominantly a huge part of it is essentially piano work, which, like, that could work one way, it could work another way for them, and they go for it, and to me, it totally lands. I was maybe more expecting this, not to the full extent, but I was expecting a lot more kind of quieter moments from the off on the first listen than maybe you were. The reason behind that is that it was something you attracted my attention to when we listened to Midnight Lovers back on the reaction. We said there's a kind of Queens of the Stone Age sound about them, which made me smile now thinking about our man in the Bronze Age, Queens of the Stone Age. I'm sure that's nothing to do with it. But there's like elements almost of things like Caius as well, like other Josh Homme projects like Caius and Desert Sessions in particular, which reminded me of some of the elements here. For those that don't know, the Desert Sessions are basically where Josh Homme, in between doing work with Queens of the Stone Age, would just grab a bunch of musicians and they'd hold out and just jam. They just get different, like a different row of different musicians would come in and jam stuff, and the best stuff from those jams ultimately become songs on like Eagles of Death Metal or Queens of the Stone Age, or you hear earlier versions or ideas or licks that go that way. But there's a kind of formation of Nothing's Off Limits. I love those sessions. I'm a big fan of that stuff. So when I was listening to this, those moments where they really start to push out and explore different elements of, like you mentioned, kind of like doom rock or kind of tinging on the sludge but not quite fully committing, or elements of prog in the traditional sense. When they're doing that, it just all worked for me. I will agree with you to an extent. I think this is an album that you need to, when approaching to listen to, be fully aware of the runtime. I need to commit that time to listen to it. This album is just over an hour and 10 minutes in length, and this is not a kind of, I'll jump in and listen to track number 5. I think the only track you can do that with, is, as mentioned before, is Midnight Lovers. It's the only one that you could, and that to me is why I said this makes sense to be a single, because this is the one that you could probably listen to in isolation without necessarily like twisting an opinion on the album. And I'm glad that they put it at the front of the album and not like a track 7, because that to me is a really disingenuous place to put it. They hit you with that 1-2 punch of the Fall of Athens and Midnight Lovers as a kind of concept of the rockier side of what they're doing, and then they pull it right out from that point onwards. From track 3 basically to track 13, you're gonna go places, and you're gonna get a bit of vulnerability in their sound, and you're gonna get a bit of something that's certainly a bit more energetic and leading you. This is not even like, what talk tempos, like there isn't much in the way of anything with pace in this. It's all very deliberate and it's all very measured, and it all works really well. Like yourself, I was conscious of the 2 drummers, so I was conscious trying to pick out, like, by you're listening to track number 5, you're like, why do we need 2 drummers here? But it's because there's not 2 drummers on every single song. And the work on the keys particularly, that would make sense if their drummer was doing a bit of that as well, because there are elements where there's 2 distinct key sounds. And you know, they could do that live for sure. And I imagine, once again, you don't want like the drummer putting his sticks down and kind of looking around. Vocally, this is fucking the tits, man. I love this, and like you said, the melody's really, really, really good, and he invites you into those quieter, more vulnerable moments. But the vocal melodies are just lush. Like when they kick in, it opens a whole range of kind of the listening experience. So I love that as well. Production is excellent. Like absolutely excellent here. So loved all that as well. Like yourself, it's an album that on a technical level, on a writing level, on a kind of a listening level, there's nothing you can really mark it down for. That being said, like yourself, I think that the album does run a little bit overlong. Just being honest, I think there are certain songs where, like Ramblings is a great song. It's almost 9 minutes in length. I don't necessarily think it needs to be 9 minutes in length. That being said, though, I'm not the musicians in the band, and I didn't fucking write it. So you can have it however long they want it. But by the time you're getting to tracks like Call My Haircut, and you're well into this, you're over the 50-minute mark on this one. It does start to feel its length in parts. So depending on your mood, depending on what you're doing, depending on your interest, this is not going to be a casual listen to by any stretch of the imagination. But as a fucking album, it's brilliant. I was thinking about this. Do I want an album of tracks that all sound like Midnight Lovers, or do I want this? And the answer is I want this. I don't want an album that's just full of kind of catchy, upbeat rock stuff that doesn't have the depth of what this band can bring to the table.
Yeah.
And that's where I got excited, because the easier way of doing things is just writing a whole album of that. The more challenging, more rewarding thing from a listener and a musician, I would say, is what they give you on this album. It's the dichotomy of listening to things like a Ramblings into a track like Brutus, or a Bill Odyssey into a Hexed Endeavour, the title track. I don't know what I fully expected. What I got wasn't something that was wholly surprising to me, but by God, is it rewarding. So I think this is great. You know, this is one of these albums where, one, I'm glad they're British. Two, I'm glad that they released something after such a long hiatus. And three, can't wait to see them on the road. I think this band would be fucking great live.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing they're doing here. I keep going back that they can hide behind.
Yeah.
They will sound shit hot live. I can just tell from listening to it.
Yeah,
so
definitely. Ratings then for this new album from our man the Bronze Age. As I said, I kind of went into this thinking it was going to be something else. You know, it's like when you see a movie trailer and you're like, oh, that looks really interesting, that looks really good, and then you go and see the movie and it's like that trailer just completely missold what I was expecting. I did not get what I thought I was going to get, but what I ended up getting was actually so much better. You know, there's the depth on this is fantastic. I never really mentioned the production, but I think that the production is actually really well done, considering the fact of the amount of different styles they've got going on in this album, and to make that sound kind of cohesive and all the same album, especially when they're dipping in all these different styles and tones, I think is really clever.
Sounds like a single room studio, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You get that kind of earthy feel to it that I really, really, really like. That you just imagine that, you know, most of this was just recorded live with them all in a room. Yep,
definitely. So. My only kind of small gripes I had, a couple of songs I felt kind of burned on a little too long. A couple of the hooks maybe just didn't catch me quite as well as some of the others, but it's very small, to be honest. There's not a lot to kind of complain about on this album. For me, I'd probably go 4.5 on this one out of 5 for me. How about yourself?
4.5 as well. I think this is fucking great. And very much like yourself, my only negative against it is that I think a couple of the tracks are maybe a smidge too long. And that is it. And that it's not something I can like. Once it feels weird critiquing. To them, that's how the song sounds. It feels weird to say that, but for me, those elements are like, well, you know, I've heard that. That's looped around 5 times now. But it doesn't need the 6th and the 7th. And that's purely my mind and composition. But musically, this is fucking brilliant. You need, like, honestly, if you have even the kind of slightest passing interest in British metal and rock music, and you don't check out this album, you yourself are the problem. So sort yourself out.
Yes, our man in the Bronze Age, Hexed Endeavours, drops on October 8th on Fr33zehead Records. If you want to check them out, facebook.com/our man in the Bronze Age. I put a link below to their Facebook and to the pre-order for the album so you can check it out. Let us know what you think. Once you've heard it, stick some comments in below. Happy to hear your thoughts on it. That is the review. Thank you so much for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.